1940s. Playing basketball in the 1940s meant stepping into a league that barely knew what it wanted to be. The Basketball Association of America, which would later merge into the NBA, was just forming, and games looked almost unrecognizable compared to today. Players wore short shorts, dribbled with one hand most of the time, and the pace crawled because there was no shot clock yet. Teams often stalled, holding the ball for minutes at a time, creating scores that sometimes didn't even break 40 points. The skill gap was wild too. Some players came from barnstorming teams, while others were ex-college stars with little professional experience. Crowds weren't massive, and arenas often doubled as hockey rinks, which made the floors warped and slippery. The ball itself was heavier, harder to control, and passing wasn't crisp. Playing in this era meant surviving a rough, physical game where referees let nearly everything go. And yet, this was the foundation, the experimental period that built the rules and culture of professional basketball. But the chaos of the 40s was nothing compared to what came next. 1950s. The 1950s changed everything with the invention of the 24-second shot clock. Before this rule, teams could stall endlessly, and fans were walking out of arenas. The league needed a fix, and Danny Biasone, owner of the Syracuse Nationals, delivered it. Suddenly, offenses had to move with urgency, forcing players to actually take shots rather than dribble the clock away. For anyone stepping onto the floor in this decade, the difference was massive. The pace skyrocketed, and scoring exploded compared to the plodding 40s. This was also the era where George Mikan, basketball's first true superstar, dominated the paint. Standing at 6 feet 10 inches, he looked like a giant next to most players, and his success forced the league to widen the lane to stop him from camping under the basket. The competition grew tougher too, with the league expanding and integrating as black players began to join and showcase talent that changed the landscape forever. Playing in the 50s meant adjusting to a sport that had gone from slow chess to fast-paced action almost overnight, and the new era was just heating up. 1960s. If you played in the 1960s, you were living under the shadow of one team, the Boston Celtics. Led by Bill Russell, they captured 11 championships in 13 seasons, creating a dynasty that feels impossible to replicate. Russell wasn't just a defender. He was a psychological weapon, altering shots and shutting down entire offenses. Playing against him meant knowing your best look at the rim might never even leave your hands. But the 60s weren't just about Boston. Wilt Chamberlain stormed onto the scene and shattered records, scoring 100 points in a single game and averaging 50 points per season. Imagine stepping onto the court and having to guard a man that size and that skilled, knowing he could humiliate you on any possession. The pace of play was frantic, with teams regularly scoring over 120 points and players rarely resting thanks to shorter benches. Rivalries turned bitter, and the NBA's first televised games introduced the league to a wider audience. The pressure, the travel, and the physicality were brutal. But first, only cool people are subscribed to this channel, so hit that subscribe button before we go any further. 1970s. The 1970s were basketball's Wild West. The NBA wasn't the only game in town. There was also the ABA, a rival league with its own style. Players had to choose between steady NBA contracts or the flashy, freewheeling ABA that introduced the three-point line, slam dunk contests, and a showmanship the NBA lacked. The ball itself was red, white, and blue, turning every game into a spectacle. If you played in the 70s, you had to adjust to chaos both on and off the court. The merger in 1976 finally brought the two leagues together, but not before legends like Julius Erving made their mark by flying through the air in ways people hadn't seen before. The league was also plagued by financial instability and an image problem, with arenas often half empty. Yet the level of talent was exploding, and the physicality was intense. You'd face bruising battles under the rim, questionable refereeing, and a schedule that wore players down. The 70s felt unpredictable, like the sport was reinventing itself every season, but it was nothing compared to the explosion that came in the 80s. 1980s. The 1980s transformed basketball into a cultural phenomenon. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird ignited a rivalry that saved the NBA from low ratings and bad headlines. And stepping onto the court during this era meant becoming part of a show broadcast nationwide. The pace was relentless, with fast breaks defining Magic's Lakers and precision half-court execution fueling Bird's Celtics. If you played in the 80s, you faced brutal physical defense too, especially from teams like the Detroit Pistons, who earned the nickname Bad Boys by hammering opponents with elbows and hard fouls. Superstars like Michael Jordan entered in the middle of the decade, instantly raising the bar for athleticism and scoring. Playing through this era also meant traveling constantly. enduring back-to-backs without modern recovery tools, and facing crowds that were louder and more invested than ever. The NBA was no longer just a sport, it was becoming entertainment, complete with endorsements, highlight reels, and superstar branding. The 80s made basketball bigger than life, and set the stage for the domination that was coming in the next decade. 1990s. Playing in the 1990s meant living in the house that Michael Jordan built. He wasn't just the best player, he was the standard by which every opponent was measured, and shutting him down was nearly impossible. But Jordan wasn't the only challenge. This was the most physical era the league had ever seen, where hand-checking, shoving, and punishing fouls were just part of the game. Facing the New York Knicks or Detroit Pistons meant you weren't just competing, you were surviving. At the same time, expansion teams like the Toronto Raptors and Vancouver Grizzlies arrived, bringing the NBA to new markets. The decade was filled with stars. Hakeem Olajuwon, Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, and Shaquille O'Neal all left their mark. Playing in the 90s meant dealing with relentless defense, grinding half-court offenses, and a spotlight bigger than ever thanks to global broadcasting. Jerseys became iconic, sneakers turned into fashion statements, and suddenly, the NBA wasn't just America's game, it was spreading worldwide. The 90s were fierce, bruising, and unforgiving. And just when things seemed at their peak, the 2000s would bring a whole new wave of chaos. 2000s. The 2000s were ruled by larger-than-life personalities. If you played in this decade, you lived in the shadow of Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal's dominance with the Lakers. Their 3 straight championships set the tone, and when they split, the drama only intensified. The Spurs offered a completely different challenge. Tim Duncan's quiet, methodical greatness paired with Greg Popovich's system that squeezed mistakes out of opponents. Playing in this era also meant bracing for Allen Iverson's cultural impact as he brought hip-hop influence into the league and made individuality part of basketball's identity. Offenses were slower, with grinding half-court sets, but defenses were brutal, anchored by physical enforcers and hand-check rules that still allowed defenders to steer ball handlers. The arrival of LeBron James in 2003 changed expectations forever. Suddenly, you weren't just playing basketball, you were battling a teenager already being called the chosen one. The 2000s felt like a tug of war between old school fundamentals and a new generation of explosive athletes. And what came next would completely transform how the game was played. 2010s. The 2010s flipped the sport upside down. If you were a player in this decade, you had to adjust to the three-point revolution led by Stephen Curry and the Golden State Warriors. Suddenly, shots from way beyond the arc weren't bad attempts. They were daggers that destroyed defensive game plans. The Miami Heat's Big Three showed how super teams could dominate, and the idea of teaming up with other stars became the blueprint for winning titles. Playing in this decade meant learning to defend endless spacing, transition threes, and pick and rolls run at warp speed. But it wasn't just offense. The decade also saw LeBron James rise to his full power, dominating finals appearances with whatever team he played for. Physicality was still present, but the league was cracking down on hand-checking and hard fouls, making defense trickier. The shift to analytics pushed teams to value efficiency above all else, changing shot selection forever. By the end of the 2010s, basketball barely resembled its 90s form, and players had to completely reinvent their skill sets just to keep up. But the changes in the 2020s took it even further. 2020s. The 2020s have been defined by chaos, adaptability, and global expansion. If you're a player now, you're competing in a league that values versatility above everything. Positionless basketball has erased traditional roles, and players like Nikola Jokic and Giannis Antetokounmpo dominate with skill sets that would have been unthinkable for their size decades ago. The game is faster, more spread out, and more reliant on shooting than ever before. But it's not just about the court. Playing in this era also means navigating massive outside pressures. The pandemic shut the league down in 2020 and forced players into the Orlando bubble, a surreal environment that tested mental toughness like never before. Social media now magnifies every moment, turning highlights, mistakes, and even rumors into viral events within minutes. The NBA has also become more global, with stars from across Europe, Africa, and Asia shaping the league's future. Playing in the 2020s is as much about adaptability as it is about skill. The pace, the pressure, and the spotlight are relentless. If you like this video, consider watching this next one, which YouTube thinks you're going to really love.